I didn't plan to become a widow at the age of 33. I had no plans on losing my husband, my marriage, and my sense of certainty all at one time. And I definitely didn't plan to rebuild my life. But here I am. This is the Fly Black Widow podcast. There's a difference between meeting someone and choosing them. This episode is all about choice. Welcome to the Fly Black Widow, episode number 3. Hi, and welcome again to episode 3 of the Fly Black Widow podcast. I'm Ceci Coleman, and I am your podcast host. So, as we continue the journey on how I became a widow, we're going to continue on to where things started when I decided to make a choice to start dating my husband. So if you were able to stream episode 2, I talked about how we met in New Orleans during Essence Festival and how we started, I guess you could say, kindling the fire, if that makes it sound any simpler. I think that's the only way that I can describe it, is how we started kindling a fire. So where we last left off was after we exchanged numbers, beeper numbers at the time. Again, this was in 1999. After we exchanged numbers, we talked for a bit while he was still in town. And, ultimately he had to go back to Tampa. The vacation was over. But we talked throughout the entire time that he was actually in New Orleans, in the city, while he was vacationing and experiencing the festival for the first time. So within like maybe 2 weeks or so, we talked every day, several times a day. And there was just such a large connection that was there, even through the phone. We just found out that we had so much in common, and a lot of the ideals that we wanted for ourselves as young adults. We had that in common, and it was just kind of, in one instance for me, it was kind of mind blowing, but in the other sense, I was still very, very guarded, from, again, from previous situations. And in hindsight, I guess you could say that at some point I was like, this is BS. He's talking that good game, but I don't know, something in me was just like, let's just see, because there was definitely an attraction that I had to him. And it wasn't just because I saw him. I only saw him that one night, and the rest was just communication over the phone. He even asked me for my address while he was in Tampa, and he wrote me a letter. I remember the letter. And that first letter really did kind of blow me. It caught me off guard a bit. But the communication was there. He was very steady, and he was adamant on coming back to New Orleans to see me. So much so that that man booked another trip back down to New Orleans 2 weeks after we met. And I will have to say that that trip pretty much solidified us as a couple. I remember him making the plans to come back. I was still kind of like, we'll see. I'll see it when it happens. And it did happen. And those plans were made like immediately. That particular visit, his first visit back, we did not have anything solidified at that moment, because this was only our second time laying eyes on each other, even though we were, like I said, in communication several times a day. It was the summertime, so he wasn't working as a teacher in school. He was on break. I still had my job where I was working, but there was enough time for us to talk to one another several times a day during that time. But When he told me he was coming to New Orleans, I needed to see it to believe it because I was really at the point where I wasn't getting excited too much about anything based on, life in general at that time and expecting anything special from men. So I just needed to see it for myself. And he created his itinerary and he came to New Orleans. So I was kind of shocked. I'm not gonna lie, I was kind of shocked because I just was not at the point where men were being truthful and men were being just forthright, with being truthful. So I just needed to see it. So I saw it. He came and I picked him up from the airport. Can't remember. Yeah, it was a Friday night. It was a Friday night. I picked him up from the airport and our first stop was the daiquiri shop. I took him to the daiquiri shop and we went to the riverfront to just kind of sit down and talk for a while. So we talked at the riverfront for the bulk of the night, and it was just such good conversation. He held my hand while we walked. I just remember him just telling me how pretty he thought I was and how much I had caught his eye while we were in the club. But he also told me that he sensed, some reluctance on my part. So something in me started trusting him with the information as to why. I told him, about the previous relationships that I had mentioned earlier in the previous episode, in episode 2. But I felt comfortable enough to tell him that. And I felt like I was open enough to do it because he was open enough to come and see me again after 2 weeks and a whole bunch of, communication throughout that time. And I think looking back, I was able to share that information with him because it was like me setting it up to say, I have been through this and I have been through this. And I'm not going to allow myself to go through any of that anymore because if you're here on that BS, you can go back to Tampa because I'm simply not for it. But we talked and we just gelled so easily. And I remember there was another man that was passing by and he admired, oh, you guys make such a nice looking couple. And I remember telling him, him telling the man, yeah, this is my wife. This is the second time he said that. The first time was in the club when he introduced me to his friends. The second time was to a perfect stranger who just automatically thought that, we were a couple because we were sitting on that bench and just kind of vibing out. And that did make me smile a bit. But again, reluctance. This man might be saying anything. He might just be giving me the BS, and I ain't falling for it. Um, but that was pretty much the start of how things just became um realistic. Because as the trip went on, I started to let my guard down a little bit more, and a little bit more, and a little bit more because we just spent so much time with each other talking. I learned so much about him, about his upbringing or lack of, because there was a lot of lack of in his life, as well as mine. So we started sharing all that information with each other at that moment. But the thing that warmed my heart so much with this man at that time was when he met my daughter. I did allow him to meet my daughter. She was 9 months old at the time. Again, it was just me and her. And he stressed how he at least wanted me to try with him. But in order for me to try, I had another person that I was responsible for, and she is a part of my life. And if I am going to pursue anything with anyone, they would have to accept the fact that I have a daughter. And during that trip, He met my daughter, and they, even though she was 9 months old, they gelled almost immediately. It was like they like they knew each other for a long time. He was so playful with her, and he was just nurturing with her, and that shit scared me. It scared me a lot, and I'm like, okay, God, what's happening? What's really happening? I didn't ask for this. I don't know what to do with this. I'm feeling good about it, but I'm also not feeling good about it because I don't know if this is right. I do not want to jump into anything. I do not want another form of a bad relationship. What is this? What exactly is this? And he sensed that while during his visit, um, so much so that he invited me to come to Tampa and spend some time with him in Tampa, just so I could know how serious he actually was. It's still so early in the game, y'all, but it was there. It really was there. And I just slowly but surely, after he made that trip, I started letting my guard down like, okay, God, are you answering a prayer that I had a while ago that I just wasn't ready for right now at this moment in my life? And thus began our relationship. We decided to start dating before he even left to go back home to Tampa. And I remember what that departure was like, bringing him back to the airport. It was just such a gutted feeling that I had. And at that time, I was able to walk him into the airport and walk him all the way to where he was boarding and saying bye. But I felt absolutely gutted when he left to go back home. And that's when I knew that something was there and I could not fight whatever it was that I was feeling. And I had to really hone into myself to determine, am I making up this feeling? Am I allowing myself to really feel this? Is this really a real feeling? Is this crap? um, so I made the conscious decision that if I tried, I would make it worth my while and the best that I could possibly make it. I would definitely tune into myself to make sure I don't make or didn't make some of the same mistakes that I made in the previous relationships that I was in. And that I would be completely open and vocal to what I needed. Because one thing I do remember telling him from the very beginning, this is what I need. I need this. I need this. I need this. And I need this for my daughter and that for my daughter. And if you are not able to bring that to the table, there's no sense for us to even try. I'm not in that headspace. I don't feel like playing around. I don't want to be anybody's, you know, go to when, nothing else is going on, or being anybody's maybe. If we're going to do this, we're going to do this. And we decided to do this. It was rough being apart. Um, so we tried to get together as much as we possibly could. And for me, it was a little bit harder because of my daughter, with her being so young and getting ready to go into my career as a teacher, and him starting back up as a teacher, because this was in July. School starts in August. All we had were weekends to see each other, but we just made sure we stayed in touch with one another often. So it was a lot of back and forth between the two of us going to see each other between Tampa and Florida. And my first time going to Tampa, I absolutely fell in love with the place. I love water. I love being near water. It just brings such a peaceful and calm nature for me. And Tampa is near the water. So I explained that to him on my first trip. Like, I want to go to the beach. We went to the beach. We went to Busch Gardens, had a good time at Busch Gardens. We went out to the club, met some of his friends that were out there. And we also went to his church. Um, this church was different from any church that I had been to. It was called Bible Based Fellowship. Reverend Arthur T. Jones from the Florida Mass Choir was the pastor of the church. It wasn't a mega church, but it was a nicely built church. It was upscale. They had a lot of prominent folks from Tampa that were a part of the church, and he actually took me there on my first trip. And the first person, one of the first people that I met was this woman. And I want you guys, if you follow along in the series, I want you guys to remember this name, Aunt Pearlie. She was the very first person that I met when he took me to his church. He introduced me to a lot of people, but Aunt Pearlie made sure she came and gave me this huge hug. And she was like, "Hey, baby, blah, blah, blah." And I'm like, "Oh my God, this lady is so pretty and she's so sweet." She had this beautiful gray short haircut and this big old smile. And they knew each other because she was the cook at the school where he taught. So the school where he taught was Bible Based Christian Academy. I think I got the name right. Bible Based Christian Academy, which was a part of the church. So he was a first grade teacher, and she would cook him special breakfast in the morning. She was the cook for the school, but she made sure Mr. Coleman was taken care of. But when I met her, there was just like this instant gravitational pull that I had with her. And I was like, if I come back, I got to make sure I come back to see Aunt Pearlie. She was just so warm and so welcoming. But I met a lot of his students. I met a lot of the parents of the students. I met so many people at the church that respected him as a member and that he respected also as members. And just, it was such a beautiful community. And the service was absolutely wonderful, there. And I just enjoyed being in that atmosphere. So I always enjoyed my trips to Tampa that I took because that church was always a part of what we did on Sundays. But I enjoyed the back and forth as well because even though, I was away from my daughter for a couple of days at a time, I was still able to get out of New Orleans for a while and just see things a little bit more clearly, not only as far as the relationship was concerned, but to actually, go back and forth to another city that I had never been to before with such warm weather that wasn't so muggy during the summer times and even, you know, during the winter months, not as cold. And to just be near the water as much as I possibly wanted to be while we were out there. But we created something that was very, very special at that time. We established a monogamous relationship. I made the choice to allow him to love me. And I made the choice to allow myself to love him. As scary as it was and as vulnerable as I felt, I made the decision to not be so hard on myself and to see love for what it was because we fell in love with one another. And looking back, it was a feeling, even though I've said I love you to like my first boyfriend, that was my first boyfriend, but thinking that you're in love and actually being in love are two totally different things. And I felt like I was in total love. And I felt like he was in total love with me. So I made that conscious decision to start letting my guard down and not be so hard and just becoming a little bit more softer about the notion. So he and we did back and forth between New Orleans and Tampa from July through November. And I will talk about what happened in November on episode 4. So, yeah, choices can be difficult to make, especially when it comes to affairs of the heart, when you've been wounded, even if it's just one time, it can harden you up. But to go through it on multiple occasions where, you just where you think, okay, this won't happen to me again, this won't happen to me again, and it does. I believe that I hardened up more because even though I said, okay, I'm not going to do this, this, and this, I still did that, and that, and I still got hurt. So just trying to understand who I am, what I wanted, where I needed to be, and how I wanted my life to look, especially at the age of 23, 24. No, I can't even remember. Can't remember how old I was, but it was like 23, 24, 25, something like that. But just to be at that moment, at that time in life, that's when you start figuring out what you want your life to be and how you want to shape it. And I felt like he came along at the right time. I felt like he showed me what I needed to see in order to understand what love is, or what love was at that time, and that I didn't have to be as hard or as hardened as I'd become, that I could soften up, even if it was just a little. And it did take some time for me to soften. He had to break down quite a few of my walls in order for things to work. And, I had to have several come to Jesus moments for myself or with myself to make that happen. But that is the start of how making a choice shaped what my future actually looked like. So, I was going to look like. So, episode 4, we will talk about what happened in November of 1999 and what life looked like shortly after that. So, tune in. I appreciate you all so much for joining me on this adventure. Lots of views so far between the different platforms. So I am highly appreciative of you guys either watching on YouTube or listening on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And again, there's also a companion to this. There is a playlist that I have created on Spotify with some really beautiful music that shaped how things were looking for me and my husband at that time. So it is called Love Unverified on Spotify. Stream it. I think you would enjoy it. Thank you so much for joining, and I will see you on episode 4.